Good evening, everyone. Worlds and Crafts, a stream devoted to opening the curtain of creation on setting building, mechanics, meta plots. Tonight is a pretty special episode that are going on that everyone is most certainly aware of by now. But before we get into that, take a moment to settle in. So welcome everyone. I believe our fourth episode. Don't recall exactly. Losing track. So, for those who are here who were not immediately aware, this week we're going to be donating all proceeds NAACP legal defense for Black Lives Matter. And we as a company, Gehenna Gaming, support Black Lives Matter through and through. Absolutely none of that anti-protester bullshit. Nope. And try and amplify their voice, especially considering we're mostly a white-owned, want to promote equality, justice. Tonight I want to talk about themes of our game. Tonight I want to talk about the messages we send creations. Talked a little bit about that last week, but I want to continue it because of events currently. Messages we send with our actions, our words, our creations are communicated, whether we want them to be, especially as white people, especially as privileged people. We must be mindful of the messages we send and always strive for intentions that uplift equality, tear down oppression. There can be no peace without justice. Justice without equality. There can be no equality without change. Hoping that we're going to act that 20 for the sake of all, especially for. So, tonight, let's talk about some themes. But, how's everyone doing? Getting the rest they need? Hydrating? Pull up some kumu.io. Time to implode. Hell yeah. Wow. Adding some elements here. Last week, there we go. Right, so last week we had worked on building a species. Oh man. Reimagining dwarves. Hey, as it turns out, if you hit the wrong key on the keyboard, the sounds I've got going right now, I don't know if you guys can hear them. Please let me know if you can. Tried my dearest to make sure that they'd be able to be heard. Currently playing Primeval Forest. If you guys can hear it, great. If you can't, I feel pretty Unfortunate. Close the door. Ink one. Storm's Rush for the moment. Better name. And instead of a speak. Done. They're related. And, you know, the heroes traverse Western map. Oh, I'm cutting in and out. Uh-oh. Talking to gain ever so slightly. Testing. My voice still cutting? Oh. Alright, yeah, do let me know, thanks. The Storm Valley Dwarves also have by 9 really in the valley. Connection to anything R instead of E. And add an element for that lovely little dwarven city. Grr! I scream at the technology for cutting in and out. Try powering off my preamp real quick, so I'm gonna go silent. Okay. You know, actually, I wonder about something. I'm gonna mute my my sound from my noise. See if that helps. Fine when I speak up. Okay, so I guess I'm not being loud enough, which is weird. I haven't changed my volume at all. Check my microphone. Still got all the same filters on. Okay. Maybe I'm just not being loud enough. So I will try and speak a little louder. Maybe be heard over the commotion of whatever the fuck is going on. But, yeah. Alright. I think that just about... Oh, I had one more element to add, which was that village. Or village. So the connection to the Fresh Valley Dwarf. And a connection to River Valley. Dwarven Mine, I'm going to just put the element type point of interest. Village, a point of interest. Beautiful. So, our Kumu map is thus far still unconnected. We have two disparate sets of things going on here in both sides. That's pretty exciting because that means have plenty of ways that they can connect. And now, I know on the end of last stream, I had said that maybe, we could work on another area. And it's possible that we might be able to. But I think it's really important that we also talk about the types of events, the types of themes, the types of stories that led to where we are today in America. Because it's important. And that's kind of the role of storytellers. Talk about things in the past that have led to the point now. Or talk about things that could change. I mean, you think about like speculative fiction, which is, I've noticed, and at least in my opinion, has become increasingly more popular. Possibly because it gives us a glimmer of hope in some way, even when it's dark, that humanity will continue on, that life will continue. Essentially, the threat of climate change and I don't really want to focus on that because those are outside of our control. They're completely beyond, our immediate. Obviously, climate change is a man-made thing, or not man-made, man-affected issue. But right now, focus in on issues that are occurring right now. Black Lives Matter movement, with white supremacy, and hell, even with imperialism. So yay. What I'd like to say first before we begin is that if you would like to consider yourself an ally, that the most important trait of an ally is a willingness to change. We have to be willing to listen, change. Doesn't matter if they were mean. It doesn't matter if they were harsh. People of color have been dealing with oppression for a very, very long time in the United States. And it's a lot worse than I ever knew when I was younger. I wasn't taught the truth about this. Of course I wasn't. Part of the problem that we're going to talk about. I wasn't taught the truth. And I think a lot of white folks weren't taught the truth going. And that we've had to learn the truth. And in some ways I think we have the internet to thank for that. It helped to provide so much information coming in that it was kind of easy to go, well, maybe my parents are wrong. Maybe they are wrong. We're shedding these heritage lies all the time. So let's keep that good work up. Talk about a little bit about empires. Talk about empires and fiefdoms and all kinds of things. Because, right, we're talking about medieval fantasy for the most part. Okay. Medieval fantasy thrives on, basically, ignorance, right? Because that was what the Middle Ages was. The time of great ignorance in Western Europe. Called the Dark Ages for a reason. There are so many locations in the world that were doing a lot better, frankly. A lot better. I mean, like the Arabian Gold. Wrong wording here. Either way. Hi, Rose Dragonist. How are you? I was just kind of yammering at the camera about empires, fiefdoms, and how promoting certain ideas can. Rose coffee? That sounds interesting. I don't know how to feel about that, but I kind of want to try it. Rose coffee. Cool. So whenever we're talking about medieval fantasy, for the most part, we're talking about, like I said, Middle Ages type environments, but it's a fantasy. So it's ultimately spun in a positive way, something at least remotely uplifting. Dark fantasy, of course, using darker themes, but still it is a fantasy. I think that horror is in many ways the antithesis of fantasy. Fantasy horror is a term you can use, but I get dodgy. I get iffy about it personally, because when I think of fantasy, I think of something fantastical, something phantasmagorical. I don't think of horror, but I do think you can combine some elements, make it dark fantasy. Anywho, so empires, Middle Ages. I didn't really do any investigation or anything much for tonight. I was busy dealing with things involving dog and also writing an open. But I don't know when what the first empire really was. Think about it. I don't know if anyone really. Maybe we do. Sure, some historians. But it strikes me that imperialism has always been taking of resources from other peoples to fuel your own. Seems to me that imperialism is always just taking land, resources, and whatever you have to fuel your society, to fuel your economy. That's why imperialism is so bad. Because it's ultimately just oppress the people around you for your own excess. Right? I mean, you think about all of the empires, that were just pre-America. The last great empires, big quote there. England and France and Portugal and Spain. These great empires, these white Western European empires. Established in Mesopotamia. Interesting. Adia or Arcadia. Thank you for that broken goal. I always like random factoids. 2350 BCE. Yeah, that's a very long time ago. But yeah, I can imagine, when I think about empires, I kind of ask myself, I'm like, well, why did that start? What formed that? And you think it must have been some kind of hardship, been some system in which most certainly Rose Dragoness. Yes, no, there have been empires all over the world. Let me preface that. I'm not just talking about Western European empires here. But when we're talking about medieval fantasy, for the most part, people automatically gravitate towards Europe because, of course, like Tolkien. So I'm kind of focusing in on those roots a little bit. But yeah, no, I definitely think Rose Dragoness brings up an excellent point, which is that there have been empires all over the world for a very long time. They have committed great atrocities. This is, definitely a human issue. This is something that's not just American. It's not just English. It's not just French. It's a human issue. And maybe that's why people like Tolkien wanted to write about it, because it's a human issue. Oppression, freedom from that. Yet, we're well past certain points of that, right? At this point, we don't need to talk about empires anymore in that same way, because we have language where we talk about it face to face, right? Most people acknowledge that empires are bad. It's a word that's attached with some negative connotations now because of, well, World War II, anyone? In either case, when you think about empires, how they form, it strikes me that it's often due to hardship. It's often a militaristic warrior culture that gains some type of like post-war boon. I mean, because there's always post-war economy. That was a common thing. Um, what do you mean, Rose Dragon is by? They are more human. Approaches are smaller communities. It's hard to be altruistic if the community is big. Though some fantasy depict elves as being so old that they must be wise enough to love and peace. So, personally, Oh, I see. Larger communities are harder to avoid corruption. I agree. I think that's definitely a player in all things. Is that lack of oversight. Realistically, that's ultimately, I think, one of the largest issues with human organization and governance, when we have a lack of oversight. But either way, empires, not just kingdoms. I mean, kingdoms are ultimately the root cause, or one of the roots, starting points of empires, because kingdoms most often rely on a bunch of people being oppressed by someone in power. That said, it wasn't all kingdoms. So focus on empires. An empire, I feel like, is just an aggressive fiefdom that got so large that they had to start expanding outward and waging war as a means of keeping their country together. So when you've reached the end of your influence, the end of your physical influence with war as an empire, like all the empires that collapsed between the 16th and 19th centuries, the empires that just collapsed because their reach exceeded their grasp. And that was ultimately a good thing, because everyone started to see how bad they were. But I think that when America was founded, that the founding fathers ultimately saw all of the problems that were occurring with the British Empire and thought, well, we have to be able to do better. But better meant a lot of things, could have meant a lot of things, and the only thing they could agree on was creating a system in which people had a vote, and it's not, and then basically boiling down the very complex issue that ultimately comes down to economics, boiling it down to displacement of power. Well, surely if we have power distributed among certain groups of people, it will not be a problem, because no one individual can order this horrific action. When those horrific actions, as it turns out, were necessitated by an economy that thrives on oppression. Just because the empire was dismantled doesn't mean imperialism went away, though, right? Empire doesn't exist, quote unquote, yet imperialism is still there, alive and well. It relies on the oppression of other people. Or, in this scenario, it relies on the oppression of a group of people in your own country. Think about it. Think about every type of individual that is oppressed in westernized capitalism. They're almost always indigenous. People who have wisdoms of ways to live that don't involve oppressing us. So when we're building our fantasy world, I think we really need to be very cautious about how we use things. Be extremely cautious, especially as white authors. We need to be cautious about how we use them, because you can talk about a lot of issues that are caused by empire by just having one exist. But if your overarching meta plot, or just even the way you write about the empire, appears too positive, and not critical, it can have positives and negatives. You can do that because you want people to talk about it. But if you make the narrative too positive, and there's no, like, you, let's say, have all these beneficial things they have, like, oh, I don't know, better education, better infrastructure. Yes, they have those things. At what cost? If you're not talking about the cost while talking about the benefits, you're ultimately being pro-imperialist, definitely supporting a narrative that white supremacists use all the time. So, like, we have to be really cautious. And please, do not think I am academically equating imperialism with white supremacy. No, not exactly, but they are conflated in many ways because of, well, the last, quote, great empires. They were all white. So, talk about then what kind of messages we can send using empire. Let's use empire. But let's talk about some positive messages we can send, or maybe not positive, rather, but messages of equality. right? Messages of justice, of equality, messages of change. What are some messages that we can send, and how can we send them? As you internalized, used, support, an unsustainable internal structure. So I think that one way you could use empires in a respectful way is by showcasing their flaws. Maybe having groups in the imperial city who speak out against the opulence. Um, yeah, if you include empires, make it real. People are being oppressed every day in order to fill the excess of the empire. Showcase that. I think another way that you can do honor to something is showcase non non-currency using, or lack of, yeah, showcase society that use no currency and the peace and benefits result. And of course, to always be fair, showcase the weaknesses of that. I think you'll find that there are very few weaknesses, except for in large cities. Cities are where currency was born, because well, you had to walk 30 square miles in order to sell your goat. Well, it was a lot easier to carry a pocket full of something. Um, I don't know, do you guys have any suggestions? Thing that you can think of where you include empires in fantasy? What would you suggest to add? Make sure that we're telling a narrative that isn't too diluted and speaks truth to power. That's true. Yeah, if you have an empire, you also have bandits and also taxes. Um, showcase addition. Propaganda, unlawful action, protest, like thievery. Also, as always, include of brigands. What word to use? Miscreant. Of actual people who are causing problems for these groups. Taxes. Why do they exist? What are they funding? And of course, every nation in the world at this point has taxes. There are no nations without taxes because, well, they're nations. Technically, free. If we're talking about empires, this is technically pre the existence of nations. So there's still these areas that they might just call hinterlands, or that particular land, you never go there, it's very harsh and don't do that. So there's these kind of gray areas between nations, between empires, between cities, whatever, depending on your unit of size. We're not, we're not really quite in the Age of Reason. So there ought to be wilderness. And Broken Golem, you said, are you saying were the bandits causing problems, or were they just outcast? Yeah, I mean, I think that's accurate. That ultimately, taxes, the taxation of populations is, yeah, it's really ultimately just funding the imperial city. 10% goes to the empire, whatever, then more depending on how despotic it is. Talk about levels of despotism. For example, if one particular imperialist nation decides that they are only going to tax people, then maybe include a group of loyalists. Their reasoning is previous overlords who beat them and murdered them. Right? Levels of despotism. Excessively. These are, like I said, kind of just suggestions. And I'm always open to other people's opinions on this stuff. It's important to talk about either way. But yeah, so I don't know about everyone else, but me, in how I was raised by libertarian fundamentalist Protestant Adventists. And and I was sent to private Christian schools, very small ones, frankly, very poor academics. And when I recall back to my history, to social studies and all of that stuff, the absolute phenomenal lack of accurate history was just mind blowing. The amount of revision in American history books that I was taught with was just, it was horrifying. And I didn't, of course, learn this until much later. And so that's why I think it's really important that we showcase a better understanding of history and of the moving parts of history with games. We all want to engage in a fantasy. We all want to not think about it. That doesn't mean we have to avoid including it. Like, we all kind of want to be like, la la la, I'm playing a game. That's fair. You can have a world where you can tell those stories, but don't have to. You're not obligated. Oh, wow. Rose Dragoness, I did not know that. Yikes. That's interesting. I didn't realize that the Shaolin monks were record keeping for that history. That's another thing that we could very easily talk about as well if we're talking about empires. One of the biggest ways that empires over the centuries have manipulated people is through religion. The pilgrimage to other countries, spreading Buddhism, the writing. Oh, well, I learned something new today. Thank you for that. Just trying to think now about I think that's probably enough. But yeah, to use empires ethically in storytelling, I think it's either got to be one, portrayed as very, very accurate history, including oppression issues that plague territories, provinces, colonies of the empire, while the part of opulence. And then two, the empire is the abject enemy. Because I think that's frankly one of the few ways we can easily include empires ethically in storytelling. And when I say ethically, I mean supporting peace, justice, and equality with our words, with our life creation. All right, I'm gonna read back through what I wrote when talking with you guys about this, and if it sounds intelligible. Using empires ethically in storytelling. 1. Portray them as very accurate to history, including oppression and issues that plague the territories, provinces, or colonies of the empire, while the heart of the empire remains opulent. 2. The empire is the abject enemy. Empires are usually externalized oppression to support an unsustainable internal structure. If you include empires in fantasy, make it real. People are being oppressed every day in order to fulfill the excesses of it. Showcase them. Showcase opposition to the regime through the use of propaganda and unlawful actions that are through the use of propaganda. Showcase opposition to the regime of unlawful actions that are acts of protest and the propaganda levied against them. Thievery. Also, as always, include the notion of brigands and people who are committing violence out of a sense of uncertainty rather than for a cause. Taxes. Why do they exist? What are they funding? Talk about the levels of despotism in your empire, maybe. If one particular empire or imperialist nation decides that they're only going to tax people, then maybe include a group of loyalists whose reasoning is that the previous overlords were excessively brutal to them, so taxes are preferable. Showcase societies that use no currency, peace and benefits that can result. Showcase the weakness of that. Talk about the origin of currency. Sure to use respectfully. Use concepts. Definitely avoid immediate inflation between current I shouldn't say current, between indigenous beliefs, because current can be misleading. Immediate conflation between indigenous beliefs. Fantasy. Hi, Kayla. How are you? Me. Ah! Why, thank you. It is indeed a happy day after birth. That sounds weird. Also, for empires, showcase how they co-opt religions, faiths, beliefs, and gods. Boop. Try and make them appear more beneficial. Right, divine mandate. Yes, exactly. All right, I think that makes perfect sense to me. So, Kayla, you just joined us. We were indeed talking about themes and messages in storytelling, and how one of the most, in my opinion, problematic things that occurs within fantasy settings is empires, and not giving them the complexity that makes them opposable, but also difficult to. So if you're not using them as the abject enemy, then there's a lot of work in making them. Victory over the people mover. The people elevator. It is the people's elevator. So, I think that's a good addressment of empires. So here's a question for you guys. Do you have I have one more, but do you guys have any particular elements that you know of in fantasy that have been problematic and that you would like to see addressed in a fantasy setting? Is there some particular thing? I mean, there's a lot, and I have more I can bring up, but I want to give you guys the opportunity to input more on the direction. And by the way, Kayla, I'm glad you made it out of the. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, right now, we're talking about ethical storytelling, which is what I should have titled this. That's pretty. It's pretty universal to say that. So maybe ethical storytelling as a white person. That's fair. Yeah, so many options indeed. I mean, I think empires are. I only chose empires because I've noticed that almost every game tends to include at least one empire because like they make for good story or whatever. But I feel like a lot of the times those empires are painted in a very positive way, even when there's anti-imperial sentiment. Yeah, so I mean, empires rely on stratification, so sexism, classism, and racism is all usually included in that package deal. But what specifically with sexism, racism, or classism do you think? What is a specific example you have for me? Ah, monsterism. I like that. About monsters. We just talked about this last night. If you tuned into our other stream. The what went from birthday happy hour to um 5 dudes rambling and varying levels of inebriated for 3 hours. Monsters in dun 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 dun. Yeah, adventurers are about the equivalent to pioneers. I say pioneers, I mean the military unit. They go into a place, I mean Marines. Prior to World War II, the Marines would have probably been called naval pioneers because they go into a place, precede the armed force, go in to take it and set up things, and Kobolds lives in middle. So I'm fond of going two directions. One, going the animalistic direction, and then two, going the cultural difference direction. So ultimately, the big thing that seems to separate humans from other animals is our ability to build very deep, complex sets of expectations. We have a lot of like capacity for if-then scenarios. If this thing happens, then this thing. And like that's how our cultures evolve. We have a very, very huge ability to create layers upon layers of if-then scenarios. And that's, why our language can get really complex and frustrating, and, why cultures can seem so weird, because cultures are all about fitting in. Ultimately, what it is, you're fitting in with your group. So we talked about how cultures might evolve and adapt over here, which is extremely relevant to monsterisms, I think. As we talked about these dwarves, who, frankly, they were a little monstrous. They don't, they might be humanoid, but there's enough differences between them and, let's say, humans that, I can imagine that there would be the potential of included racism. And when I say that, I mean in conveyance, not in setting. If you have a racist group in the setting, that can be iffy. But it is important that you make a proper statement about that. That you're not, as a writer, saying, yeah, these guys are over here, they're hairy savages. This particular group hates them. Like, you can't do that. You really can't do that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, you're just pardoning xenophobia. You're just pardoning racism. Like, I won't say anything except I'm saying something by pardoning it. There is no such thing as not being involved. That's why I feel like we really need to talk about how we portray things. So let's talk about sapient races. Let's say species. For the word races. Sapient species, sentient, and I don't know what else to call the other one, because there are many animals that are sentient. So we'll just leave it at that. Sapient species and sentient species. So when talking about sapient species, none of them should be called monsters or implied as savages in or rulebook, in the story, in any of the omniscient content. So the omniscient content, of course, just being top-down. I am seeing things through the eyes of God. So, yeah, because ultimately, calling someone monsters, calling someone savages has been used for oppression for a long time. Very long time. So we really, in our own games here, unless we feel like being really shitty people, to avoid that. Exactly. So yeah, none of them should be called implied as monsters or savages. And ultimately, when designing a culture that is otherwise alien to humanoids, ensure to include notion of ties to nature, because all cultures arise from creatures who have ties to nature. I don't care if it's ties to the Feywild, that's still nature. The nature of wherever they're from. I don't care if it's the Shadowfell, that's still nature. And ultimately, avoid the trope that a people from a hard region are unilaterally xenophobic and violent. The Blackfoot Indians are from a very, very hard region. I've been there, and it's horrendously hard. And they weren't unilaterally xenophobic or violent. They were known to be hard because that's part of their environment. Like, when you're talking about a people, you're writing about a people, you can't just talk about the bad. You can't just talk about the problems they have getting along with other cultures, because then you're engaging in racism. Every culture has goods and bads. So then, with sapient species, talk about how they cope with cultural differences between groups. If you are going to comment on those cultural differences, it is entirely possible you can run a game where there are cultural differences, but you just kind of fudge over that communication because that's not a theme of your game. A theme of your game isn't dealing with other cultures. That's fine. You can just be like, yeah, we all have an understanding. Cool. So if you're addressing cultural differences at all, talk about how people cope with the cultural differences between. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I think a failure to cope with cultural differences is also one of the roots of racism. Or at least it's related. For sentient species, and we're going a step down from sapient. So sentient, I would say, is ultimately things like corvids, things like dogs, dolphins, elephants, each having their own specialized type of intelligence that helps them get through whatever they're going through. And all of those mammals I just mentioned are highly social creatures. And so it seems like sentience, self-awareness, for the most part, it seems like a social trait, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like anytime we discover an animal that is sentient and recognizes itself, because they're a social animal of some, even if they're not completely so. But the awareness of self versus others seems pretty integral to mammals in general. You have to be able to tell the difference between you and other things. It seems pretty weird. I can understand how insects might be able to get by otherwise, because pheromone markers, kind of following these clues, and it's almost like their central nervous system is the world, like for colonies of ants and that, for anything that's social. But we don't call that sentience because each individual ant isn't self-aware. So for sentient species, it's most animal species. If you're going to design a sentient species, they communicate with Reddit. Yeah, they call it Hive. So most animal species are sentient, in my opinion. So I'm just gonna say IMO because it's not technically proven yet, but that's fantastic. So yeah, most animal species are sentient. So if you're gonna make a monster species that is ultimately just animalistic sentient, you kind of come back to that whole they can't be universally bad thing. Like, they can be harmful. Like their way of life can be predating on a specific group, like wolves. Before wolves basically almost went extinct in North America, when they were thought extinct, they were a problem for farmers and ranchers. Well, they would eat their animals, but that's just their way of life, nature. They have no ability to project into the future and go, oh, I better stop eating these particular animals, because they can't abstract that far. I would say that's the difference between sapience and sentience. Sentience is an awareness of self. Sapience is the awareness of future consequences for past actions, and a couple other things. Because ultimately, that is something corvids can do. So maybe they're sapient. But I don't know. We can talk about that another time. And if they are, do they have souls? I'm just being silly. Most animals are sentient, in the opinion of Bran. As a result, they cannot be universally bad. I think that if you're going to build a monster that's out in the world, you kind of have to ask yourself, is it a part of nature? Or was it made by a mortal? Was it created by a mortal? Because that's something. Because that's something I think that's important as well, because you can showcase the fallibility of man, so to speak, fallibility of humanity, by them being like, we can create a new species with magic, and then it's terrible. That's a story that's been covered before, but if that's your if that's your game, then that's your game. Fine. So if you build an animal as a monster, what role in society, or what role in nature are they playing? What niche are they filling? If you choose to build a sentient based on something created by mortals, then what has the drive to survive and versus the inbuilt commands creator done to that life form? What has it done to them? Good opportunity, showcase humanity often fucks up nature. Try and twist it, serve us. For some reason right now, the only thing that's coming to my mind is the fucking plowshare. Thought we were doing good. Yeah, I think sentient species are a great way to showcase the arrogance of humanity, because they lack the ability to culturally interact. They're just living their lives, and you can use that as a contrast to your sapient species cultures. Talk about, arrogance of humans, etc. And just recovering this real quick. None of your sapient species should ever be monsters or savages. Ever. That's racist. Because it comes from the imperialist notion of oppressing a particular group. So, let's not use that rhetoric. Avoid it at all costs. That said, on that cheery note, we're going to be taking a break here in a moment. So, once again, just covering it one more time. That all proceeds to Gehenna Gaming this week are being donated to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And yeah, just all proceeds from this. So please make a donation to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, whether it's through us or not. We don't care. Just, we have to do something. We have to use our power to amplify Black voices. And yeah, that's all I want to say about that. There can be no peace without justice, justice without equality. There can be no equality without change. We must change. I will see you after break. And we are back. Sorry, it took a moment here. Hope everyone stretched their legs. Got some water up the stairs, so pardon me if I sound out of breath. I had to bring my puppies upstairs. Doggos. Very sad that they were all. Can't have a sad puppy. Audio dropped out again. Well, hello. Testing. I don't know why it's so problematic. Maybe, you know, I'm gonna check my noise gate. I think it's probably the problem. Oh. Well, maybe you can go. We'll leave it for now because suppose, you know, I mean, earlier you said if I speak up, it's not a problem. But, you know, definitely let me know if it changes. So there was, I really wanted. I have to find it, as I wasn't prepared. It was Medium article that was I think it was Medium. It was about TTRPG and black creators. And I had it up and must have closed it. But I'll see if I can get it by the end of the stream. Yeah, I'll see if I can get that data set up for the end of the stream. But there's you know, we definitely want to be boosting Black voices as much as we can right now, not taking over the spotlight. Which is why, if you have noticed, I haven't used any hashtags. It would be a shame if someone drown out racist tags, fonts, with, you know, random squares. Big shame. Terrible. Awful. Imagine. Alright, that's all I have to say. Much shame. Big wow. Okay. So, going to what Rose Dragonus just said, I'm glad you liked the map. Sometimes when I make a fantasy world, there are thoughts I want to either put humanoids in, will highlight with other sentient races, or eliminate humanoids from the world altogether. Yes, I am as well looking forward to listening to Dave. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to be there for the whole stream, but it just depends on how long. But yeah, I know. So yeah, let's go ahead and just do the thing we haven't done yet this stream because I wanted to focus on Black Lives Matter, which is, if you are unaware of the lovely map printmaking program we are using right now, it is Inkarnate, INKARNAT.com. It is a beautiful program in which you can shape land masses, change the color of seas, change the color of land masses, put stamps in, and with a variety of tools, make a beautiful map of your world. And we are kind of soft sponsored by them, you know, working together. They agreed sponsorships, so it's pretty great. If you guys want to check it out, please go to their website. It is only $25 a year, which is amazing, by the way, because The Pro version comes equipped with so much stuff. It is hard to fathom. You have access to, I'm just going to open up the stamp selector real quick. You have access to, shows my totals here. It doesn't show the total, but in either case, you have access to well over 500. Looks like closer to 800 stamps for your worlds, including like mountains, towns, and trees, all kinds of stuff. They even have like trees of life and town variety of types represent the base fantasy races. The map that we're currently using is a fantasy world regional, I believe, 2K resolution, but Pro can make a 4K resolution map. So please check out Incarnate, play with it. It's well worth your time if you kind of boost visual representation. Gaming. So that's that, Incarnate. We are also, right now, but I usually use mynoise.net. Play some background sounds and get myself in the mood for writing some spooky stuff. And then the last tool we're using is kumu.io, which is a relationship mapping software often used for things like social networking analysis, but it's also useful for networking information in a setting. It's also useful for relationship maps in Vampire the Masquerade, because all you got to do is enter the names of people and then create different types of relationships between them. Very, very fantastic. You can network an entire city with that. You can use it for, frankly, a lot more than Vampire. Just so happens it's an integral part of Vampire. Use it for any tabletop role-playing game in which you want to talk about the relationships between different people in a city. So this is a great piece of software. Software? Yeah, I guess. I mean, it is software. Just web. To use for that. And those are the tools that I've been using. Get those. Moving back to races and talking sapient. And, Rose Dragoness, I have also thought it would be fun to run a game of non-humanoid sapient species. Because it sounds fun to me. So it really depends, I think, on who you're writing it for. Because your target audience will matter with what they can play. If you're targeting basic, like high fantasy folks, then, well, you're not really gonna have as much traction as you want if you don't have something to actively replace the major fantasy races, and all of those are humanoid. So right, exactly. It's hard to relate to non-humanoids. You can easily, actually, that's a really good topic, I think. Such a good topic. The degrees of separation between the player and the character is a really big deal, I think, when it comes to gaming. I think the games that are easier to get into have fewer degrees of separation between the player and the characters. This is why certain games that are like, on the nose medieval, like really truly medieval, they lose people because the number of degrees of cultural separation between a person today and a person in the Middle Ages is so huge that it's hard for people, who don't have like a degree in medieval history, to really accurately play this character, and that's not fun. Because you're just like, wow, I kind of like returning to the old crunchy games that were needlessly crunchy. It's very easy to overwhelm your players. So I think this is why a lot of games that involve playing non-humanoids often take a lot of either sensibilities, culture, or technology from something a little more familiar. Yeah. No, I'm actually wondering now if anyone's ever tried to build a if anyone's ever tried to build a game where you play as like a non-humanoid monster in the Middle Ages, you are the Wolfman. I mean, obviously, that's humanoid, so yeah. I'm struggling to even fathom that right now because so many monsters from, frankly, people. So let's continue to talk about that. Monsters, sapient species. If you look back on heritage or oration, oratory history, a lot of monsters are not humans, or not even necessarily humanoid. Some of them are. They're not humans, but ultimately the thing that is monstrous about them is an exaggerated human trait. And the first thing that comes to mind for me, I do not want to do this in disservice, so I'm not going to repeat the actual story because I don't know it, but is things like the story of the Wendi-Go. Is it if you've ever read or heard the tale, the Algonquin legend, or or even some of the legends from, literally forgetting the name right now. Either way, if you ever heard or read the stories, tales, it's a cautionary tale against cannibalism and basically saying that eating human flesh turns you into a monster. So that's something that I think is also very interesting, and is very very potent storytelling tool is monsters. So while none of your sapient species in the game should be considered monsters, maybe monsters need to be defined by their actions. So maybe monsters in each culture are different. I actually think it would be a lot of fun if each culture in the fantasy world, even though it's a fantasy world, have myths about monsters, and you don't know which ones are true and which ones are cautionary. I think that would be a lot of fun, because it gives you the opportunity to do things like go on a wild goose chase, um, or find a real monster. So this is organic. This is me just thinking this right now and kind of rolling forward, and I'm gonna explore this here with you guys. Definitely not trying to teach anyone this, but I wonder, maybe monsters are not just defined by a set of behaviors and actions that are considered tolerable to life, but monsters are created by behaviors, actions. So maybe the whole thing of like, eating flesh. Maybe um I do like the idea of including actions that, that's fair. Defined by a set of behaviors and actions that are considered deplorable to life. Yeah, okay. That are either dangerous to people. The people. Dangerous to the people, misunderstood. Hmm. Good, maybe compulsion. That are either dangerous, misunderstood, compulsion. I don't know, something else. But monsters are created by behaviors and actions. I think that would be really interesting if that were the case. It kind of makes the game world almost have a certain divinity to it, and at that point, if monsters are created by certain actions, we are outright making stances about things. with that. So maybe, mayhaps, may. Um, Now that would be triggering. Thinking had someone engage in bigoted behavior that they turn into an actual monster. That could be a good thing for a game full of privileged people. But otherwise, it's just kind of forcing people who are oppressed to just kind of relive the day. So, um, but yeah, anyway, I don't know. It's just a thought that I'm still gonna chew on. I'm gonna chew on that thought. Is that monsters are created by behaviors and actions? Because I feel like there are some good applications, but for the most part, I do have some favorite monsters. So I actually want to ask over that. What are some of your favorite monsters? So when you say alien, you mean the xenomorph, which is ultimately a xenomorph. I actually don't know about the dark one. Are you saying that oozes are one of your favorites? Broken Golem. I actually really like oozes myself because they represent like mindless hunger, you know, giant amoebas. Yeah, I know what Stalker is. I just don't know what the dark one is for Stalker. A buddy of mine plays Stalker with this like survival mod that makes it really, really hard, I guess. Um, the dark one doesn't have anything to do with the doesn't have anything to do with the center of the zone where there's like wish granting powers, does it? Xenomorphs, in my opinion, represent well, I mean they're representative of an evil created by against ultimately represent an evil created by arrogant, let's say humans, even though they were aliens. Of course, it is important to remember that the entire Alien franchise is, or at least Alien, is an analogy. It's a metaphor for sexual assault. Xenomorphs represent that. That it's everywhere. That you can't escape it. Never know where it's going to come out. That's pretty interesting. So, what is the Dark One representative of? Representative of Rose Dragons? Hmm. So the Dark One, sort of the unknown. Maybe the powerful one. Ah, I'm glad this autocorrects because that up. And dragons. Oh, dragons. dragons, it seems like they represent whatever the storyteller wants them to represent. Which is actually one of the reasons why I'm not really a huge fan of dragons as just like a tack-on species. I used to love dragons, but and I think it's because ultimately at the end of the day, I feel like they represent the aspiration to power. That's what I feel like. And I don't know. I'm so on the fence about dragons because they went from being this monster that was in a lot of different mythologies to somewhere along the lines being this very specific thing. You know what I mean? Because it really depends on where you were from. If dragon was either a monster, an animal, or a god, like there's so many myths about dragons from all over the world, but we seem to have condensed it down into all three. They represent in heraldry guardianship. Western dragons that they're actually guardians. Huh. Oh, they represent in heraldry. They represent the aspiration of power. I actually do like the idea of dragons they wouldn't be monsters at that point. I wouldn't be willing to classify them as a monster. Um, but frankly, I don't think I would be I wouldn't be willing to classify the Dark One as a monster either, because these are both ultimately sapient. Um, let's go with favorite sapient monster. That yeah. This is starting to look good and interesting. Man. So I guess what I'd like to spend a couple more minutes doing real is let's take a look at those dwarves we had built. And kind of, yeah, I'm take a look at those. So these dwarves stand between 4'8" and 5'6" and are very thickly built. Large chests and broad faces with heavy brows, and they have a strong attachment to the earth and spend much time of their early civilization in caves. Their adept sense of smell and the ability to sense heat, sensitive organs between the bridge of their nose, their eye sockets, served them well in the darkness of their old home, and now these abilities aid them in being some of the finest metallurgists in the known world. Their eyesight, on the other hand, is poor compared to other folk, and inhibits them from thriving in certain environments. They raise goats, sheep, aurochs, tubers, and mushrooms for food, clothing, and trade. As their society has evolved, they have used their strength, endurance, and senses to become adept at stonework and metallurgy. And we decided that they mostly wear clothes fashioned from animal pelts and the spun fibers of a specific tuber. That they had a settlement in the North Storm's Rush River Valley with a mine. So, if we're talking about monsters, we're talking about, the very traits that have been portrayed as monstrous by previous setting builders, by previous world crafters. What would you say for these dwarves? What would you say is something that they find abhorrent? Something. Excuse me. What do they find abhorrent? What is something that would be culturally an affront to? I think you're absolutely correct, Rose Dragoness, that a lot of monsters do represent some kind of animal thing. Um, but I also think that Broken Golem does have a point that a lot of times monsters represent some base urge that humans have to overcome. Um, like never allowing yourself to succumb to hunger so badly that you would eat a person, for example, and taking steps against that. But evil fungus? Are you saying that there's like you're saying that go ahead and paste. Right, which I think ultimately was just kind of overused. I mean, it was the concept of like wizards fucking with the world has created this dire bear, things like that. It's like, I mean, it's good to include that kind of stuff, and I don't think we should ever avoid that. But it seems a little strange that that would be the majority of the most deadly monsters out there. Is some, you know, renegade wizard who created this thing. Frankly, if a renegade wizard created an entire invasive species, I'm pretty sure that the entire nation would hunt down renegade wizards and kill them. Like, it would be a major event because it would be disrupting the entire ecology of the region. Yeah, that's a good point. Humans against nature and power can corrupt. Um, so these dwarves who lived underground and are very thickly built, great sense of smell. They can sense heat. They probably find it abhorrent. Probably like hate the excuse me, too much of a certain smell maybe. I'm trying to think if there's anything that would be overpowering and headachy and natural. Most of the really terrible stuff for scent didn't really evolve until the Industrial Revolution. That was when people were like, what does this thing do? I have no idea. Well, it looks like it's making people's hair fall out, but you know what? It makes the scent last longer. Holy shit, let's put it in the thing. Like, so all the terrible smell stuff didn't really happen until much later. Um, though, people do have their own smell. So maybe or something these dwarves find extremely abhorrent is being uncleanly. Like, they just like bathe regularly and keep themselves really clean and they expect everyone else to do the same. And if you don't, better fucking go take a bath. Hmm. Smell, cleanliness, the smell of rot. Well, sorry, of flesh rot. Oh my god. I mean, that there could be a cautionary tale about that. Why not? I can think of one off the top of my head. Sit down, children. Because we're about to learn a story about our heritage. Long ago there was a little boy who refused to bathe. He said, "No, Mommy, I don't want to bathe." And this little boy refused to bathe, and soon he became so caked in dirt that he left patches of dirt wherever he went. And his mother said, "Listen, you're going to become Earth. If you don't take a bath, you need to bathe." But the little boy refused and ran away. And soon he became covered in so much dirt that you could not identify who he was. And I don't know where to go with the actual story arc from there, other than, well, I think you get what I'm getting at. Kid turns into an Earth Elemental. Boom. Done. And of course, the solution to bathing. No, I don't know. Maybe not an Earth Elemental, but the kid is basically turns into a rock or something, or a stone. Because of that. So, if they find uncleanliness and the smell of rot abhorrent, mayhaps there is a type of fungus that cannot sporulate unless it is there's sufficient like dirt. And so, maybe like if you got a lot of dirt under your fingernails as a dwarf or something, type of fungus that could sporulate, maybe it infects you. Roots of the reason why it's a problem. Not properly do a ritual to bury a body can attract bad spirits and turn the body into a monster. Yeah. No, I was not about to type fungus. Oh my god, the Golgothan from Dogma. I haven't actually seen Dogma, but I know what you're referencing. That's what the little boy turns into. I might be using the wrong word with sporulate, I'm not sure. Subterranean fungus that easily and infection without regular bathing. So, something simple that's, that's deadly or dangerous, but ultimately makes it so that uncleanliness has become abhorrent. And yeah, I think that's a really great one too. Not doing to bury a body can. So the ritual should ultimately make it so whatever thing can't turn bodies into monsters. I like that. Not that's we don't have enough time to detail that out, but that's a really great, like, it's a really good use of burial rituals in a fantasy world. So, I mean, what do they find abhorrent? The undead. They need a burial ritual back. That's true. I mean, ultimately, we could be talking about the same fungus. Maybe that fungus is a specifically evolved fungus that predates only on this species, at the moment. And so they just basically like you wash off after your day in the mines or whatever, and make sure that you're fully bathed and fully cleaned and fully combed. So maybe the whole undead thing is the burial ritual, mayhaps, is to also maybe prevent that fungus from taking over the dead body. Maybe it makes zombies. I like fungus zombies. And this was long before The Last of Us, all right? It wasn't new. It was just the best use of it to date by when it came out. Fungus zombies. So, the reason why we're talking about this is what do these dwarves find abhorrent is we are attempting to figure out what disagreements could happen between them and another species, and we're doing it early. We're basing it on their lifestyle, because you can come up with other things later on for more content. Well, that's a thought. So bathing ritual, cleansing ritual, balming, antifungal. I like that. I think that's cool. And yeah, basically it's a cordyceps, um, of some variety or another. Fantasy cordyceps. I was actually a little disappointed that the book that I bought, which was fantasy fungus, didn't have anything like that, but it did have a lot of more generic use. Because I guess we often focus on the extremes of fungus, the stuff that'll kill you, or the stuff that's completely edible, when there's a whole range of stuff in between that's for medicinal purposes, or if you boil it properly, you can, or it can be used to make all kinds of other stuff, so that book contains that. But nothing on a zombie fungus. A bummer. Cool. So yeah, talking about ways that that these people's lives, and the way that they develop as a people affects what they find abhorrent. We are down to just about 10 minutes till we're over here. So let's begin to roll back on up to this. Let's hit that BLM tag one more time. So guys, this has been Worlds and Crafts. Been talking today about themes, storytelling, how we can use those themes and those ideas, tell stories that promote peace, justice, and equality, and talk about injustice, inequality, and change. Right now, we're living in the largest civil rights movement in American history. That's important. Huge. The amount of big deal that is, I cannot begin to put into my voice, and I wish I could. So do whatever you can. Support Black Lives Matter. Support your people of color in your life and outside your life. If a person of color approaches you as a white person, shut up and listen. Realistically, just listen. I know that maybe they're going to say something that isn't 100% true about you, but it's not about you right now. It's about them. And we need to give them that space. You can talk to another white person if you are struggling about it. Please feel free. Reach out to me. Go to my Twitter, @Catholicaros. You can contact me there. I also know that there's a lot of members of Gehenna Gaming who are also willing to talk anyone about these topics. When we have the spoons, we're definitely there for it. So don't listen to the lies about the protesters being violent or calling them anarchists. They just want to be able to live safely and freely, and we need to promote that. We need to use our voice, amplify. So definitely follow hashtag BLM on Twitter, and keep up to date, stay informed. Good. Try and find that list real quick. of Black Tabletop role-playing game art, folks. While I'm looking, do be sure in an hour-ish to tune into Stabber Studios. I don't have the link. Broken Golem or someone else, can you acquire it? Yeah. B. Dave Walters going to be going on there to talk about what's going on, kind of about what's going on with him and everything else. And I did in fact find that link. That I can use because it's on my phone. Place for it, huh? You know, actually, I will go ahead and share that on Twitter. So give me a follow at Catholicaros, and I'll put it up on my Twitter after this. But yeah, come check out twitch.tv/McStabber Studios to listen to a chat with B. Dave Walters. But thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for talking. This has been good. You know, I hope that we can continue to openly talk about things here, and specifically with regard to civil rights, color, of course, with the month of June, with people LGBTQ. Really, really important that we don't stop talking, that we don't stop talking about it with people around us, because information only spreads via your community. Change starts at home. So, look at yourself and ask, am I listening, or is my ego getting in the way? Because we, as white people, often do have that ego. And it's not malicious, defensive. We're just scared. But it's time to stop being scared. It's time to be brave. It's time to put aside the ego, because the people of color out there, they're our family. They're our allies. They're our friends. And they need us. So, fight the good fight. Stay safe. Y'all, I'm going to end 7 minutes early because that was too good. So, hope you guys have an excellent evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Give me a follow on Twitter. Sharing Black content creators left and right where I can. Thank you so much.